Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, and I'm moderating the second Google Hangout session of our second annual fall edition of the Read for Pixels campaign. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 12 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds towards the Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign, which aims to raise $1 million to be shared between the Pixel Project and the USA's National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And the money goes towards keeping the efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. We'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which is lots and lots and lots and lots of exclusive goodies from authors. And we'll tell you that a little later in this session. And you can find out more about the Pixel Project at www.thepixelproject.net. We have a very special treat for you today. There will be a reading followed by a live discussion and Q&A session with New York Times bestselling author Colleen Gleason. And Colleen's here. Hey, Colleen.
Hey, hi, everyone. Glad to be here.
And Colleen is the creator of the Stoker Holmes series, the Marina Alexander series, and the Victoria Gardella series. And Colleen has generously donated some really cool goodies to the stash of author giveaways we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Indiegogo fundraising page. And the perks include a 500-word handwritten short story, especially for one generous donor. And there are free copies of the signed first edition hardcover of A Clockwork Scarab, which is, I think, Colleen, that's the first book in the Stoker Holmes series, right?
It is, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and to nab one of these fabulous perks, please give generously. Go to the Indiegogo page, which we'll tell you all about a little later. And all funds go towards the Pixel Project's Pixel Reveal campaign to help end violence against women. And now we'll go over to Colleen, who's going to read from one of the, I think, Stoker Holmes books, right, Colleen?
Right. I'm actually going to read from the second Stoker Holmes book, The Spirit Glass Charade, which the glass is just awesome. I'll talk a little bit later about the covers for these books. The publisher did an amazing job with the covers on these books, and there's a whole story behind them. We could talk about them later. But first, if it's time for me to read, I'm going to start with a scene. Well, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about the Stoker Holmes books in case you aren't familiar with them. They're set in 19th century steampunk London, so it's a Victorian London with a steampunk element to it. And the two main characters in the Stoker Holmes series are Mina Holmes, who is the niece of Sherlock, and Eveline Stoker, who is the sister of Bram Stoker, who of course wrote Dracula. And these two very different young women have been kind of teamed up by none other than Irene Adler to work for the crown, to do undercover work for the Princess Alex, who is the daughter-in-law of Queen Victoria. So in this scene I'm going to read, we have followed the girls into what's called a new Vauxhall Gardens. And in the early 19th century, Vauxhall Gardens was a place in London where the where it was kind of like an amusement park for that time period. There would be mimes and jugglers and dancers and little plays going on, and there'd be vendors and food and everything. And people would walk through there in the evenings or during the day. And in my book, we have one of the men in London bought Vauxhall Gardens and turned it into a steampunk amusement park. And so the girls are there in this evening at this steampunk amusement park, and while they're watching fireworks. And I'm just going to go ahead and read what happens. We're in the point of view of Mina Holmes, who's Sherlock's niece, who is quite a bit like Sherlock. So I'm going to just go ahead and read for a little bit here. She's watching fireworks. I watched in delight as a new round of dancing lights blazed above. Although everyone in the crowd was gazing up as well, I doubted they were calculating the trajectory of the discharged explosive, counting the seconds between long flare, and measuring how the different colors of illumination lasted for different lengths of time before they faded. Uncle Sherlock had given Dr. Watson and me a lecture on his experimentation with explosives of this nature. I was attempting to confirm his theories regarding the angle of trajectory versus the span of the explosion, as well as using the smell that lingered in the air to identify the particular accelerant that was employed. If I had the opportunity to return in the daytime, I would also examine the area for the detritus that would be left behind from the explosives. Then someone screamed. Perhaps everyone else thought it was part of the reaction of the crowd, or perhaps the sound was drowned out by the pop, pop, popping of the fireworks. But I heard it and immediately determined from whither it was coming. No one else seemed to notice, but I didn't care. I started toward the sound, and then heard another scream, followed by urgent tones. Gathering up my long overskirt, I ran as fast as I could down a side path toward the noise. I might not be an inhumanly strong vampire hunter, but I wasn't about to stand around and do nothing if someone was in distress. "Stop! Thief! Stop, thief!" someone shouted. I tripped over a rock but caught my balance and kept going despite the strain of my lungs fighting against the tight lacing of my corset. My petticoats and skirts whipped around my legs, and I could feel the unfamiliar sensation of my bustle jouncing over my posterior. A figure burst out of the darkness, nearly bowling me over. He had something in his hand like a reticule or a pocketbook. I stuck out my foot in his path. He tripped but kept going, and I started after him. "Stop, thief!" Unfortunately, I doubt anyone could have heard me. I was using what little breath I could drag in to propel me after the pickpocket. The stones were uneven beneath my speedy feet, and the items I'd secreted beneath my bustle and in the hidden pockets of my skirt. A steam gun, an ocular magnifier, and even a wooden stake in case Eveline forgot to bring hers. I don't know how I managed to stay with the thief, but I kept him in sight as he followed the narrow footpath along the river walk. Providence offered me a hand by providing a stick or stone or something along the way, and the lanky, fleet-footed pickpocket tripped, nearly tumbling into the river. I threw myself at his person as he stumbled back to his feet. Grappling with his coat, I held on, trying to wrestle him to the ground. This was a losing proposition, for although he was probably only 14 or 15, he was tall and strong, and he wasn't hampered by corsets and skirts. He flung me aside, and I staggered, almost taking a header into the bushes, but still I held on to his lapels. "Help!" I shouted. My cry came out as more of a croaking gasp. Where on earth were all of the hundreds of people I'd seen earlier in the gardens? "Help!" My lungs heaved weakly inside my corset, blasted thing. "Let go, you blasted woman!" His knife flashed, then surged down toward me. I choked out a scream as pain blazed along my arm, but somehow I continued to hold on, spinning us about and ducking at the same time. Then all at once we were falling, tumbling over the side of the low bridge. The water was a cold, hard shock and necessitated that I release the culprit. The river enveloped me, dark and heavy. I was out of breath, restricted by the lacings around my torso, hampered by layers of skirt and petticoat. My gown became heavy and sodden, and I floundered in the depths, trying to reach the surface. Then my face broke into the fresh night air. I gasped, trying to gulp in more air before I sank again. My arms moved frantically, my legs slogging amid tangled skirts. I knew how to swim, but I was weighted down, sinking into the cold darkness. Suddenly, something grabbed me. I kicked out, struggling, grasping, but it was too weak and tangled to have much effort. My lungs burned from holding my breath. When fresh air once again spilled over my face, I coughed and dragged oxygen into my restricted lungs. Strong hands pulled me out of the water. My vision was blurred, and I gasped, desperate to breathe, but my torso was banded too tightly for the corset. I sagged weakly to the ground, energy drained from my limbs. Blackness closed over me. Everything was tight, growing tighter, stiffer, closer. I felt a yank, a violent jolting at the front of my bodice. Jolt, jolt, jolt. My body jerked with each movement. "Bloody, damned corsets," growled my rescuer. And then everything loosened. I dragged in my first deep breath in what seemed like hours, clean and cool and sweet. "What the devil did you think you were doing, Miss Holmes?" Inspector Grayling demanded. I forgot to tell you that Inspector Grayling is a Scotland Yard inspector, just so you know. I was still gasping for air. "Chasing after a bloody thief," he continued, still out of breath. "Blasted, foolish thing to do. He was getting away. I had to stop him. He had a knife!" I could feel the blood seeping from my arm. "I didn't know that. Someone had to. You almost drowned, bat-headed female." Grayling was glaring down at me, his breathing slower and deeper now. His mouth was tight, and I could see his jaw shifting. Water plopped onto my cheeks and chest from his hair and clothing, yet it didn't seem to matter. He was close to me, propped up on the grass, leaning over. I could see the outline of his shoulders and arms. They were surprisingly muscular for such a tall, lanky person. He was looking at me strangely, and when my gaze was caught by his, suddenly I couldn't breathe again. I thought for a minute he was going to move closer. My mouth went dry, and I almost stopped breathing again. Then I looked away, my heart pounding sharply in my chest. "I've been expecting a report from you," I managed to say, frantically collecting my thoughts. My throat felt as if it needed to be cleared. "About the Yingling case." "A report?" His voice was strangled, and he sat upright. "From me? Who are you? Miss Holmes, you are the most..." His exclamation was aborted when a ball of fur blasted into the area, barking and yapping wildly. Long ears flopped into my face and claws scraped my arm as Angus leapt and bounded around us. His puppy weight settled on my belly, his tail slapping furiously against my jaw. "Angus," Grayling said in a much nicer tone than he had employed with me, but nevertheless filled with irritation. "Get off! Get off!" "Mina, what happened?" Huddling under Grayling's coat, I turned to see Dylan rushing down the path. He was accompanied by the rest of our party and a small crowd of others. But Eveline was missing, drat it. "I was chasing a thief. We struggled and I fell into the river. And got a bit of a slice in the process." Grayling was still dripping and Angus was still bounding around. "Chasing a thief? Do you mean you were running after him?" a mere voice said in shock. "You should have called for help," agreed another. "There were plenty of people around." "I never heard of anything so improper," a female whispered loudly, enough to be certain that I heard. "Chasing a thief, running alone down a dark path. Young ladies have lost all sense of decorum in this day. Proper women don't run, they wait for assistance, they call for help. And they certainly don't fight. What was she thinking?" Murmurs of agreement rose and I felt my temper rising as well. I didn't even look at Grayling. For hadn't he said the same dreaded thing, called me a bat-headed female? In my entire life, no one had ever dared insult my intelligence. My long nose, my graceless limbs, even my tone of voice and pedantic lectures, but never my intelligence. So, there is a scene in which one of my heroines, who's just a normal person, and she's hampered by corsets and long skirts, she herself is going out of her way to help someone who was in trouble from a thief. And she struggled with him and fought with him. She almost drowned in the process, but she wasn't going to let her friend be taken advantage of. And fortunately nowadays, women are not restricted by corsets and long skirts and the mores of Victorian society where young women have to behave with decorum. Fortunately nowadays, women are trained to help. We learn ways to help defend ourselves. We learn ways to be smarter. And we're working really hard to make sure that I'm working really hard to make sure that my children and children in their generation are all aware that violence against women or violence against anyone is simply just, it's not acceptable. I mean, it's not even a discussion. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting scene to read simply because of the comparison and contrast to what one would hope we would be able to do today to be able to defend ourselves or fight off as much as we can in whatever way we can, whether we're female, male, or if anyone's in distress. So that's why I chose that scene.
Yeah, I read some of those because I read steampunk as well, and Gail Carriger, I belong to Gail Carriger's group and Parasol Protectorate group, and there was this article that they posted, and it was basically, do you know that over 300 women died during the era when they wore crinoline? 300 women died because of wearing crinoline. You know, it catches fire.
The way they laced them. Yeah, I'm
it's dangerous.
Their whole insides were constricted. Right around 1900, they were wearing corsets so tightly that when they laced them up, the hips were forced backwards so that the body made a shape that looked like this. And it forced their hips backwards, it tightened them, and it forced their hips backwards so that they looked like a wasp when they were walking, or they called it a powder pigeon look, where they were like, their whole front torso was forward and their spine went like this, and then their hips went like that, and it was horrible. That's violence. That was violence against women back then.
Yeah, it was like, and apparently there has been more than one case. I think the Corinoline, the South, during the Gone with the Wind period, like they had a habit of catching fire apparently, because the skirts are so wide you don't see, and it was candles, and there wasn't any electricity then, and and you don't realize you caught fire because your skirt is so huge and you just knock something over. Yeah. So anyway,
and then you can't move to escape because you're hampered by all of this. A good number of the books that I write are set in historical time periods, and so I'm always writing about women who are somehow restricted in their clothing, whether it's from a corset or long skirts. And a lot of the women I write about are superheroes, or I write about vampire hunters in different time periods, or like Mina Holmes, who's not a vampire hunter, but she's a detective, and they're trying to do all these active things, and they simply can't do it as well as we could do it today. So
yeah. So, okay, so here we go with the questions, today's questions. And there's actually a question waiting for you from the audience as well. And we'll get to that soon. So, the first question is, you write a wide variety of stories and novels across several genres, like you mentioned, and these range from mystery to romance to steampunk. And you also mash them up to great effect. Each genre has its own gender conventions and female stereotypes. So how do you navigate these genre norms and conventions to create female characters with agency and complexity? I'm not going to say strong, because the word strong female characters, that's becoming kind of contentious, because
we don't use the word strong female. Yeah.
You never say strong male characters. It's kind of, you never use the word strong with, unless you're describing someone who's really physically strong as his standout trait. But with female characters, people keep going, like Joss Whedon once said to a reporter who asked him this, and they go, why are you still writing strong female characters? Because you're still asking about them. So what we're interested in knowing today is, you've written so many genres and mashed them up, and we're not talking about strong, we're talking about agency and complexity, because these are the two traits of characters that make compelling reading and create compelling characters. So how do you do that? How do you, all the tropes and conventions, how do you navigate your way around them?
Well, first I want to say that Joss Whedon is my hero, and I ever since that reporter did ask him that question and he did respond that way, that's been sort of the mantra in my mind when I'm working on my stories. And the thing is, when I'm writing a character, whether it's a male or a female character, and let's just be honest, I do tend to write books about women who are in difficult situations, who end up having to make their own way in the world, who break the conventions of their time in many of the stories that I write, because I write in historical time periods. But it's not simply because they're a woman. It's because of who they are and where they've been placed in history. There were even conventions, for men in historical time periods too. Certain things I could and couldn't do. So when you're asking a great question about how does one sort of break those conventions in genres? And so one of my first series is set in Regency era England, which is the same time period as the Jane Austen books, Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. And I took a Buffy sort of character and I placed her in that time period. And she does have superhuman strength. That's one thing about her that makes her different from any other woman who might have lived in that time. However, she also makes really tough decisions, and she makes mistakes, as any human would, and she learns from her mistakes. And she's not only strong physically, she's intelligent, she's manipulative as she needs to be, she's quick, and she knows, and she has relationships that she has to deal with, just like the rest of us do in all of our worlds. So, but in developing a character, a female or a male character, the best way for me to really push the envelope is to put them in the most difficult situations possible. And I don't necessarily mean a situation where their life is at stake. I mean situations where they have to make decisions that readers might not agree with, or other characters in the books might not agree with. So that's one of the things. The other thing is when I work on my stories, whether it be a book with more of a romantic element, like the post-apocalyptic series that I write as Joss Ware, also under my name, Colleen Gleason, or in the Marina Alexander books, which are pure action adventure. There's not really any romantic element in there at all. Or whether I'm writing the Stoker Holmes books, which are about two young women who are very, very different, who are brought together and sort of forced to work together, even though they don't really like each other. What I tend to do in my stories is I try to build partnership between my main characters, and whether it's a male or female, one of them is they fit together. They complement each other. Whether it's Mina and Eveline in the Stoker Holmes books, you know, they fit together. So I'm always looking for a way to create a friendship, a relationship, a love relationship, a partnership between people who are they have their negatives and they have their positives. Every single one of the characters that I write, whether they're strong or whether they're you know, intelligent, they have their drawbacks. They make their mistakes. There are things that they do that we disagree with, and that their partners disagree with. But that's how life is, and that's how realistically relationships are. So I'm always looking for a way to put two people together that complement each other, and not necessarily having, you know, the female be weaker physically than the male or vice versa. It's just a matter of partnerships, because that's how things work out. The other thing is, in the books that I write, the men are always respectful to the women. They may not always agree with them. There may be arguments. There may be, you know, even physicalities, but they are always respectful of the fact that they are female, that they have a brain, that they, you know, aren't helpless, that they can take care of themselves. And honestly, I do think that that's the beginning of creating more awareness to stop violence against women, is to keep people from thinking of women as the weak sex, as the sex that isn't smart enough or strong enough or, you know, quick enough or doesn't have a broad enough viewpoint or creative enough or scientific enough or whatever. And if they're treated as equals, that's where we start, by eliminating this sort of, I'm a man and I can, you know, I can be physically abusive to you because you're a female and you're you know, smaller, not as smart, whatever. So I hope that makes sense. Felt like I was battling a little there. So
yeah. Okay, so I'll just tell the audience, because there are more questions popping up. So just thank you guys so much for leaving your questions. Just keep leaving your questions, because we'll be getting to them too after Colleen and I have finished discussing, having a discussion right now about fiction, storytelling, female characters, and, you know, and stopping violence against women. So just keep leaving your questions. We'll get to them. Don't worry about it. We'll get to them. Just keep typing them in and keep leaving them. Okay, so you know, what's interesting about Stoker and Holmes is that you are in essence creating an alternate history that meshes two classic fin de siècle, end of century, turn of century fictional worlds and genres. So it's the classic horror of Dracula and the logic and suspense stories of Sherlock Holmes. And you do it by giving it all a feminist twist. So this is kind of a two-part question. So what inspired you to do so, and why create new related characters when there were already female characters such as Irene Adler and Mina Harker that you could have pressed into service for the story?
Oh, great question. Well, first of all, I have to start by saying that I've always been a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes, and I never felt that there was a great, that I'm aware of, maybe, but that I'm aware of a great female version of that brilliant detective. We have so many different iterations of him as a male. You know, we have him in so many different TV. I mean, even like Monk and House, they're supposedly characters that have been, you know, drawn from the idea of Sherlock. We never had a female.
Yeah, and do you notice even with the latest iteration of Sherlock on modern day iteration of Sherlock on CBS in Elementary, they only did a gender bend for Watson. They didn't do a gender bend for Sherlock, which I thought was interesting.
I know, that would have been so interesting. So that's why I decided, you know, I want, well, first of all, I knew I wanted to write a steampunk world, I love to write historical fiction, stories set in different time periods in history. And in fact, even my dystopian series, the Envy Chronicles, I feel like that's almost historical because it doesn't have the infrastructure and the communication that we have nowadays. It's not a contemporary story. Most of my books are set in historical times because I like to play around with that. But creating an alternate world set in London where I have, like you said, a mashup of real and alternate history, because I've got Sherlock Holmes, but I also have Bram Stoker. Bram Stoker was actually a good friend of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who of course wrote Holmes, but instead of having Doyle be in the series, I wanted Holmes to be in the series. So I wanted to write, truly, I wanted to write a kind of a girl power, my husband calls it a bromance instead of a bromance book, where I had two teenage women, because I wanted to write for teens. I had two different young women who were forced to come together and work together because I wanted to explore the relationship of people who are very different and having to work together. They're not friends. They're not really frenemies. They just don't really want to be together. And that's something that we have to deal with in our lives all the time, whether it's someone we work with or someone we live with or whatever. So I thought an alternate steampunk world would be so fun, and I could have a lot of fun with the technology, but also the way I created the world is there's the streets have different levels, and you take lifts to different levels in the streets, and the higher up you go, the more it costs, and the higher up you go, the more rich the people are who live there, or the nicer the shops. So I was kind of trying to talk a little bit about the caste system, if you will, or society levels. But the other element of this alternate world that I've created is that electricity is illegal in my world that I've created. And so we have a whole situation where we have a black market of electricity happening. Some people have electricity and you wonder where they're getting it from and why electricity is illegal. And it's becoming clear as the story goes on that there's some political machinations going on behind the scenes, and that's why electricity is illegal. And unfortunately, I feel like that's a commentary on some of our situations happening in our world as well. So that was another reason I wanted to put that in there. But anyone who's read any of the Stoker and Holmes books will get the impression, well, not the impression, will get that it is a book about women. It's very feminist in the sense that the women are just as strong, intelligent, bold, outgoing. They are the key to the story as the men. The men don't play a subservient or less superior role. They're all equals. But we have the two girls pulled together by Irene Adler, and we have them working for Princess Alexandra. But the villain is actually a female also, the Ankh, which it's clear by the end of the first book that it's a female. So I'm not really giving any spoilers. So it's all about women interacting with women in different ways. And I thought it made sense to have it set in Victorian times because, of course, we had the Queen of England, who was one of the greatest monarchs in English history, was a female. In the third book in the series, which comes out in October, it's called The Chess Queen Enigma. And in that book, I talk a little bit about the development of the Chess Queen itself. And for anyone who doesn't know, the Chess Queen, I think it's fascinating that the most powerful piece on the chessboard is the female, is the queen, the only female. I just thought that was very interesting how that evolved. So the question that you asked me is, why did I not use Irene Adler or Mina Harker? Is because I wanted to create my own characters, and I didn't want to do women who already had a history with readers. Irene Adler has her own kind of spotted history, and although Mina Harker is quite a heroine, she's got her own history as well. And I wanted to be able to create characters that had no history with readers whatsoever, so I could create them in their own way. Eveline Stoker, who is Bram's sister in the Stoker and Holmes books, is actually descended from my Victoria Gardella, who is the vampire huntress in the series that's set in the Jane Austen era that I wrote. So there is a connection there too. So there's a little mashup there too. I hope that answered your question, Regina.
Yeah, I think it did. So let's move on to the next question, which is, we're seeing the Hermione effect now in pop culture, especially in young adults. So we have lots of capable and complex female protagonists. There's Mina. There's Mina. Sorry,
Mina Holmes.
It's Mina Holmes and Eveline and Evelyn Stoker. There's Katniss Everdeen. There's Tris Pryor, and of course there's Hermione. You know, who in a sense kickstarted the current wave of really active, smart and you know, very courageous female characters in young adult books. And you have two teenagers yourself, so. What do you think about that, the Hermione effect? Do you think it's a trend, or do you think it's actually a bellwether for where things are headed in storytelling, with being more inclusive of women and girls?
Well, honestly, I grew up reading Nancy Drew and Trixie Belden, so I'm not altogether certain that it's that new of a trend. I think that because of the Harry Potter books, the phenomenon there, that maybe made it more visible to the world at large, but I think that the trend has been there for quite a while. And actually, you look at Joss Whedon, who I think his Buffy book or his Buffy movie came out even before Hermione came on the scene. I think I'm not 100% sure, but the timing seems about right. So I'm not so sure that that we can blame it all on Hermione. Although I do love the character, and I love that she's very. She's not always likable, which is okay, and neither are all the other characters in any of the series. If they're well defined, they're not always likable, and we don't always agree with them. But I think it is becoming more sort of obvious that strong female character. I think that's, I'm using that term again, strong female characters, but that these limelight female characters are doing and acting the same way boy characters have always acted. But we always had that with Trixie Belden. We always had that with Nancy Drew. We had that a little bit with Laura Ingalls Wilder. We even had that with Anne of Green Gables. I mean, these young women, yeah, they'd had some restrictions because of their history, but I think that there were always some women trying to break free from those restrictions, and maybe Hermione was just the loudest one. I don't know.
Yeah, Hermione is definitely it for this current. I think for the millennials, for older generations, it's definitely Nancy Drew and Shirley, because Anne Shirley especially, with, and if you think about Anne Shirley, and she was brought up by Matthew and Marilla herself was never married, and she ran the farm, and even after Matthew died, she ran the farm to get with Anne's help, and hiring a couple of farm hands and getting a bit of help from the neighbor, John Barry, and they still kept the farm running right up until her death, until Anne left, until Anne left, grew up, and Marilla passed when Anne left the farm. So, it's really, that's Edwardian, I think. That was in the Edwardian period, and that was, I always thought that was pretty unusual for that time.
Also, I just thought of Princess Leia. I mean, shoot, she's been around since the mid-70s. Princess Leia is pretty kick butt herself. So, I think that the limelight female characters have always been there. They just haven't gotten the front page news as they are getting now. They're not just they weren't as commonplace, I suppose, as they are now. And I think commonplace is a good thing, because that's kind of what Joss Whedon was saying. Quit asking me about strong women, because that doesn't mean anything. So
yeah, because I think a lot of it also has to do with the rising number of film adaptations of books. The technology has made it so much much more possible now to bring the worlds inside of books to life, because previously that CGI and all wasn't that great. Only after I think Ray Harryhausen started in the 1960s, and he used stop motion. And it's only in the last, I think, 15 years that that special effects have advanced to a point where they can bring these, superhero movies and all to life. And we are still getting that. We're still getting that nonsense from, companies like Marvel, where, you have Black Widow, for example. You heard of that kerfuffle, and everyone else gets their own action figure, but Black Widow doesn't. And, and Mark Ruffalo, who's very feminist, had to wade into the whole thing and say, hello, my daughters and my nieces also want a Black Widow action figure. Why are you guys not releasing a, and I think, I think now the Hermione Effect thing conversation is topic is getting a lot of discussion, because I think teens and kids who are in their teens and young adults in their early 20s, they grew up with Hermione, they grew up with Katniss, and Harry Potter and the Hunger Games and all, they've smashed box office records. And then you get companies not issuing the toys to go with them, and you still get film executives going, women are not, leaked memos from Sony going, women led movies are not profitable, despite the fact that time and time again, they proved themselves to be very profitable. They proved that there is a huge audience there. It doesn't matter if it's boys or girls or men or women, everyone's going to see them. These are really good films made from really good books, and they're really good adaptations of books, So there's kind of like a disconnect there, I think, between the film industry and the storytellers who are actually telling the stories.
I think part of the reason probably is because when the film editors and the Hollywood producers are looking at numbers, when they put out a superhero movie, they know that they're going to attract the male audience, from ages 16 to 35 or something, and that's why that's the audience they're looking at for those superhero movies, and they don't think that audience is going to include enough women to make it worthwhile to do a female superhero, which is ridiculous, because I know just as many females who go to see action hero movies as guys do. In fact, in my household, there's three women. I have 2 daughters, and I have a son, and then my husband. My husband doesn't care for action hero movies. My daughters and I are like lining up on the first day to go see them. So I think that Hollywood producers need to start, they need to kind of catch up with the millennium, this generation. Now, the difference is in books. Everybody reads books, and women, and when you look at the market, women in general, if you look at high level numbers, they read more than men in general. And that's why I think you might see more females in fiction, these female lead characters that do all these things that have always been considered male things, which really aren't. That's probably where the disconnect is they're looking at the markets. But Hollywood needs to kind of catch up, because it's silly. And when I look at the number of people, females I know who go to see action hero movies, it's just as many as men. So
yeah, so publishing, also has its issues with sort of female-led books, though, because there's this. I think I've been following this, and there's this ongoing kerfuffle about book covers.
Yeah.
And whether female authors should use their own names, especially if you're new. Like J.K. Rowling, for example, was told by her agent, if you want to be published, they'll be looking, because Harry's a male protagonist, and they'll be looking at getting boys to read the book, and so they use her initials instead. And then there's a recent thing about this writer who sent in her manuscript to agents and publishers under 2 names. One is a male name, and one is male pen name, and one is her own name. And the male pen name got so much praise, and when she sent hers in with her name, it just got silent. And then there's the whole issue of book covers, where even if it's not there's a whole discussion on Reddit fantasy, which is the Reddit community that supports us, and you did AMA with them, and they're very gender egalitarian there, and and they were talking. There was this discussion blew up about women, about females fantasy writers. Why aren't there that many? And then people started listing them out, and then some writers like Jenny Wirtz started to weigh in on that. And and they were talking about how even if there's no romance in it, or there's no whatever, and it's a straight up adventure epic fantasy thing, they still put a romance type cover on it, and that sort of deters men from, or it gets shelved in the wrong section in the bookshop, and so it's really good to see. It's really good to see characters like all your characters, because there needs to be more out there. There needs to be more out there, and you know, the people who are on the business end of, it doesn't matter if it's publishing or film, they need to realize that the numbers are adding up. They probably use outdated, like you said, you know, they look at the males, you know, the male demographic. They don't seem to be looking at you know, the other half of the audience. They need to look at that.
I mean, I just think it's changing. You know, but unfortunately, we see it in publishing, we see it in Hollywood. You know, sort of that's why there's so many remakes. That's why there's so many books that are published that are similar to breakout novels, because once something hits and it's a trend, you know, Hollywood and New York, they tend to want to be careful, and they tend to want to remake the same thing because they know it's successful, and then everybody gets burned out on it. And at the same time, they don't, that doesn't give a chance for different ideas and different frameworks to come through, because they're so busy trying to, you know, recreate the success they've had over and over again. One thing I want to mention though, Regina, is now with ebooks, you know, people don't see the book covers as often as they used to, and they certainly don't see the book covers when you're reading something. So any you know, there is some possibility that men who might not have picked up a book with, you know, a more romancy looking cover on it, I guess, might be willing to do it now, because they aren't going to be seen carrying a book that has, you know, a man and a woman.
That is kind of sad, though. You know, if you think about it,
Oh,
you know,
I don't disagree at all. It's terrible. But I'll tell you, you know, every single movie that's out there, pretty much, especially even the action hero movies, there's always elements of romance and love in those movies, even if they're targeted toward the male audience. And that's because it's an inherent desire for every single person, for the most part, to have a partner, a life partner, whether it's, you know, whether it's a man and a woman, a man and a man, a woman and a woman, whatever. They want that love, that relationship. We're human. And, you know, I don't think men shy away from it as much as the people giving green lights to books and movies and things think that they do. It's just a matter of how frou-frou, you know, the covers of the movie posters or whatever look. I don't think men shy away from it very much at all, because they want it just as much as you know, anybody else does. They want that relationship. They get that. So, yeah. And also, you know, for speaking of using initials, my series, my Marina Alexander series, the USA Today bestselling series, it's a female action adventure series. I write it under initials because, you know, the consummate wisdom is that a man isn't going to pick up a book written by a woman if it's an action adventure, and I fall into that trap as well. But those books are published under my initials, and there's, you know, the covers don't look like there's even a female in the book. You know, it's mountains and jungle on the front. So, you know, I hate to say it, but I fall into that trap as well, because, you know, we all want our projects to have the best chance possible to reach an audience. And once you know, we trust that once they get past the cover, you know, or the movie poster or the movie trailer, they're going to enjoy the story, but it's getting past that. And you know, the book covers and the movie posters and the trailers and all of that, they give us signals as to what to expect. And so we have to use those signals to draw people in, and then once they're in, they can jump into the story. So
yeah, so you know, to continue the conversation about geek culture, yeah, a lot of it is still very male dominated. Like gaming, you know, in spite of the rising number of well-respected, well-known female authors and filmmakers, you know, and it's still it's still male-dominated in a way. Even though, ironically, science fiction was created by a woman, Mary Shelley. She wrote the first science fiction novel, Frankenstein, you know?
Great story.
It's still like in some respects, it's still like a boys' club, because we can see a very vocal minority, especially, for example, the recent Hugo Awards kerfuffle with the sad puppies and rabid puppies thing. And so, you know, what do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books, more welcoming for women and girls? Because you and I know that women and girls can be as big of a geek as boys, because like you said, your husband wouldn't go see, you know, a comic book action movie. Yeah. And, you know, and I out geek literally every male in my family, including my father, who started me on the path to geekdom. But I cannot I cannot out-geek my sister because she's the one who reads comic books and stuff, you know, but you know, by my dad, he raised 2 geeky daughters because he's like, here, have some books. Here, you're 11, take Lord of the Rings and go off and don't bother me. I'm bored, you know. Here, and pocket money as a teenager was allowances were always spent on X-Men comics and hives and going to watch, you know, and going to watch the latest, like, I don't know, all sorts of movies related to comic books, and then in college it was always everyone goes on and on about Buffy, and at the time Harry Potter was starting and everyone read Harry Potter. So you know, in a sense, we all who were born in the late 70s and early 80s onwards are all like saturated in geek culture. But there's still like hostility, you know, when you go to cons and you go to and you see panels like there were recently panels where they're talking about women in comics, and it was an all male panel.
Are you serious? That's, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. And then Shannon Hale, the young adult writer, wrote a blog thing about wrote a blog. Gosh, it's too early here. I wrote a blog post about how she went to school and all the boys were not allowed to go to a talk. They just let all the girl students, and one boy who really loved the books had to get special dispensation from the headmaster, the principal, to go to her talk, and she was writing about it, and this was just last year. And so you know, everywhere from conventions to schools, it's still very gender, in a way it's a bit gender segregated, even though as geeks we're supposed to be some of the most accepting people in the world because we're all outsiders to the mainstream. And now geek culture has become the mainstream, with people smashing records, box office records with, you know, comic book movies. So but on the other hand, Anita Sarkeesian just still gets so many death threats and stuff. So what do you think can make the geek culture a little more welcoming to women and girls? What do you think?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One is these kinds of things, these kinds of forums, the Reddit forum, and all those things where it's being discussed and it's getting more play. But I think it's just going to evolve, because it's going to evolve through attrition, because the old guard, if you will, the people who are used to the if you will, the glass ceiling between the, you know, male and female writers in geekdom, or the people in geekdom, they're going to evolve away, and then we're going to have this new generation with the Joss Whedons and the J.K. Rowling and all of these people, you know, the millennials and you know, my children, you know, as they grow older, it's just going to become normal. It's just going to become a non-thought and a non-topic. And as we get more female executives making decisions, you know, in Hollywood or in New York or wherever else these, you know, projects are being green lighted, if you get more and more females in there, I think that will help as well. But I think it's just going to happen through attrition and through, you know, raising awareness and talking about things like this, because it's already happening. I mean, we all know, like you and I and all the other geek females we know and all the other guys that we know who know about geek females, we're already there. It's just the rest of the world has to kind of retire and move on. And I think it's just already happening. It is already happening. It's going to change. It has to, because it's too obvious not.
Yeah, it was quite funny because we had Google Hangout with Cami Garcia, and we were talking about how in panels at conventions, men often like talk over women, and Cami said, I don't let them. I might be little, but I'm gonna raise my voice. I'm gonna talk really loudly so they can't, you know, talk over me. And she does, you know, and I think that's so important, because sometimes, you know, you have to really, really, really raise your voice before people actually hear you. And they might not like it, but I think eventually it's what's needed to bring change. And it's the same with violence against women. People, you see the whole Bill Cosby case, right? Yeah, he's been doing that with impunity for the last, what, 4 decades. Yes, and people are still victim blaming all. And do you see the cover of the New Yorker the New York magazine,
All the
with
pictures.
all the women, and that's not all of them, you know. And someone observed on Twitter, and this is being shared around, it's like he's been doing that openly with impunity, and no one questions him because they all blame the women.
Yeah.
And you know, that sort of privilege, that sort of privilege part is part of male privilege, and it needs to go. It needs to be taken down, dismantled, and taken down, and it needs to go because it props up everything from sexism and stalking women at conventions, all the way to shouting. You know, sometimes you can't even go out for a jog or a walk in peace. You know, some idiot male is going to, you know, yes, I shouldn't be saying idiot male, but well, the male who's behaving at that point with idiot behavior, yeah. So we'll make a really pertinent distinction. Like he might be a nice guy, but suddenly in public, see a woman walk past and they do that idiot behavior. You know, they say stuff that you really decent people do not say to other people who they don't know. Making horrible remarks about sex or whatever to someone who's just walking by, you know, street harassment, and all the way to domestic violence and rape. You know, people don't believe women. It's reflected all the way through. You know, that writer who sent in the same manuscript with a male name and her own name, and the agents and editors, they listen to what they think is a male voice rather than a female voice. And you know, it needs to go. Violence against women is one of the symptoms of all this. You know, it has to stop because women, as you said, they are people in their own right. All your characters are people in their own right. You know, equal to men, and you know, it has to happen. Now, let's go to the audience questions. There are a couple of them, and they're really good. And so the first one is by Colleen Gleason. I think I've got her name correct. And she says, I have a question about the Macy Gardella books. The old lady in the church, is she Victoria or Julia or maybe Narcisse or Macy's mother?
Well, now you see, I can't really answer that because that's kind of a spoiler, a really big spoiler. But I will tell Kathy, because I know Kathy, I will tell Kathy and anyone else who's watching that if you read the Macy Gardella books, you'll know the answer to that question by the end of Roaring Shadows, which is the second book. So it's, you know, the answer's there. You just got to keep reading. But I can't say, I'm not going to say, give the spoiler in case someone who hasn't read it yet is watching. So, sorry.
Okay. And the second question pertains to the discussion we had back at the beginning of this Google Hangout, which is, it's from Sam Joseph, and she says, how much research do you do for your work and how do you do it? Since a lot of it is set in the Victorian era and there are so many mores and weird things that really wouldn't occur to us here and now.
Yeah, you know, that's a neat question, Sam. And I do a lot of research, both, you know, in person. So I recently spent some time in Paris and Berlin, and I spent time in London some years ago. But I use the internet, and I love doing Victorian era because I can look at photographs and pictures, and getting a visual allows me to see something and describe it in my own words, as opposed to reading something that someone's written, therefore describing something in their words and having to paraphrase it. So I do a lot of research, and a lot of the ways I do it is not only by searching like Google Images. I found a lot of old maps, old like catalog pictures, you know, images from catalogs, reading novels, you know, fiction that was set during that time period. I'm working on a project right now that's set in 1900, Paris in 1900, and so I'm able to get newspaper archives. So reading the newspaper to see what the normal everyday things that were going on kind of gives a hint of what was happening. So one of the things I try really hard to do, because I usually write in these different historical time periods, is to remind a reader, you know, not all the time, but every so often, that yeah, these characters are not wearing, you know, jeans and a t-shirt. They might be restricted by, you know, their mobility might be restricted because of what they're wearing, or what they can and can't do socially. And I try to put that in there a lot as often as possible. It's a little reminder to the reader that, you know, even though this person's fighting a vampire, you know, she's not Buffy with a stake up her sleeve. She's got to put her stake somewhere else on her person that makes more sense. So the thing is, I never know when I'm going to run into something interesting that's going to end up in a book. So a lot of the research I do is I have a lot more research that I do than what I actually use in my books, because, you know, I just pare it down to what I hope is interesting to the reader. So.
Yeah. Oh, Sam had another question, and this is hilarious. She says, why are so many YA authors redheads?
Well, you know what they say about redheads, we're pretty damn awesome people. You know, we're creative, we have tempers, and I think we all, probably a lot of us, have a little bit of help with the bottle. But I think probably, I mean, you know, it's just the kind of personality that goes along with a redhead. You know, we're outgoing and you know, we just are, you know, outgoing people and like to look like we're outgoing. I don't know. I'm just making this up. I don't really know why there's so many YA writers who are redheads. Maybe we all go to the same salon. I don't know. If anybody has any more questions, feel free to pop them in there. I don't know if how much more time we have here.
Yeah, we actually have, you know, if anyone has any more questions, we have up to 30 minutes left. But we've got, you know, for the discussion, we have just a few questions left, if you have time. So, okay, so in your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about sexism and violence against women, i.e. make a conscious effort to include characters both male and female that show readers the importance of respecting women as equals and human beings, and on the other hand, telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
Well, I mean, I think that kind of what I said earlier is you decide on a character or a setting or a conflict, and you build a story around it, and you write the story, you know, without making a decision like, oh, this is a, you know, this gender, this character has to be this gender, and this character has to be this gender. I think to just write the story about two characters and not really, I mean, obviously their gender is going to play some role, because it has to play some role, because we clearly have, you know, differences because of the genders, but not, you know, not putting them in normal role, you know, making them the normal role model, or putting them in the normal stereotypical roles. I have one of the books that I wrote in my Envy Chronicles series, which is set in a post-apocalyptic Las Vegas. It's the book called Abandon the Night. I have a little bit of a role reversal, if you will, and I don't like to use that term, but let's for the sake of commonality. The role reversal, the female is the physically more active, kick-ass person, and the male lead is the more intellectual, sort of, you know, strategizing, and he's actually, they're both emotionally needy in their own ways, but he's the one that needs the anchor and the stabilization and the strength of the woman, as opposed to it being, you know, the woman needing the strength and the anchor of the stability of a man. He's the one that has, you know, issues that requires her, or that's why they become partners and lovers, because she balances him out in a way, and she gives him the stability. And I try, you know, to do that, and I think a lot of authors try and do that, where we have characters that they have their weaknesses, and their weaknesses are filled in by their partner, their working partner, their love partner, their friend partner, whatever, and the other one has a weakness that's also filled by the partner. So it's everyone has strengths and weaknesses, and when you find your life partner or a person that you work with closely that you really care about, you fill in those weaknesses. And it really, at that point, gender doesn't really matter. I mean, we have the different parts, but that's really, you know, at the end of the day, that's really the only difference that has to be there, are the parts. I mean, they don't have to have any, you know, any play in the story. So I think just writing the story without thinking to myself, oh, I need to have a female character who does this, or oh, the male character has to be the one to do this. You know, have in my Stoker and Holmes books, I have the females save the day and the guys save the day just as often. And in my Envy Chronicles, and in fact, all the books that I write where I have, you know, women who are the lead characters, they save the day just as often as the men do. Not to say the women are always saving the day either. They take turns. It's very equal. And it plays to the different strengths, and I don't mean physical strength necessarily, of each character. It makes logical sense, you know, when someone saves the day, how they do it. So I think it's kind of inherent in just writing a story with a well-rounded character in an interesting world and a compelling conflict. I think it's just evolved. The thought of gender doesn't really matter anymore. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, so you have been so incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. So, in your opinion, how can authors like yourself best support efforts to kick off social change to end violence against women?
Well, I mean, obviously doing things like this is obviously one of the things, but, you know, whenever we have a forum to talk, you know, because that is one thing, you know, authors have a platform, regardless of how big or how small it is. We do have a platform on social media and in our stories. And I think some of the ways to do that are just sort of inherently, you know, writing characters that show respect toward women, regardless of whether they agree with them. I mean, I think, you know, the important thing is to show that you can disagree with someone, maybe not even like someone, maybe definitely not like someone, but still have respect for them. And I think that that comes through in all of our elements of our platforms, you know, in social media, in our stories, in our conversations, in questions and answers like this. You know, it comes down to respecting people for who they are and not trying to exert control over anyone. And by writing, you know, characters that show respect, or writing characters who don't show respect, and then showing how other men or women are able to combat that character who's disrespectful or violent. It doesn't have to be a man who is violent, you know, against someone. It could be a woman, either way. But if there's violence or there's disrespect, both genders need to respond to it. And, you know, additionally, I have 3 teenagers, and my goal is to teach my son as well as my daughters that everyone should be respected. Everyone, you know, you can disagree with someone, you can not like them, you can loathe what they do and what they stand for, but that's never an excuse to be physically violent against anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, and so how do you role model to your kids?
Well, we talk about things, you know, when we see movies together, we talk about things like that. You know, we have a lot of discussions in our household about, you know, just how, you know, just how to deal with social situations that might come up. You know, I have, like I said, I have 3 teenagers. You know, my youngest is a freshman in high school, and actually my oldest is almost technically no longer a teen, and she's 19 now. So, you know, we always talk about that, and we try also to model that in our household and when we interact with people all the time. But one of the things I, you know, say to my children over and over again is, you might not agree with someone, you might not like them, but there's never an excuse to say, you know, mean things or to do, you know, physical things to them. It's just, you know, that's just how we talk about it, and we model it, and we make that part of our discussion. It's just part of, you know, it's like a normal way of life. I'm not saying that, you know, my kids never fought, my son never, you know, hit his sister, but you know what I mean? You know, we try and talk about that as, it's just a matter of fact. It's just a part of life. It's not anything that is, you know, unusual. So.
Okay, so it's time to wrap up. So let's go to that little slide that we've made. And here we go. Can you see it?
I can see it, yep.
Yeah, so everybody, here's what Colleen has generously donated. So she's donating a 500-word short story written especially for one generous donor, and it will be handwritten and it will be sent to you. And it'll be for your eyes only because Colleen is sending it directly to you. We don't get to see it, even if we're curious. We don't get to see it. It's for your eyes only. And Colleen has also got 3 copies of the Science Press edition hardcover of A Clockwork Scarab which is the first book in the Stoker Holmes series. So if you're watching this Google Hangout and you would really like to, and if you're in the US or Canada, and if you would really like to try out reading Stoker and Holmes, here's a chance to do something good, donate to the cause to end violence against women, and try something new, which is this Stoker and Holmes series. And as per the slide on the screen, you can go get these goodies by donating at our Indiegogo fundraiser, which is at is.gd/R4P Indiegogo 2015, and that's case sensitive. And PayPal donors can donate at is.gd/R4P Resume 2015. And if you are donating by PayPal and you would like one of these goodies, you will need to contact us ahead of time to let us know, so that we can see if we can take it off Indiegogo, so no one else accidentally donates for it in the meantime. But you have to be fast. You need to let us know beforehand so that we can actually remove it before someone else clicks on that perk on Indiegogo. And you can find out more about, oh yes, and our email for you to email us to let us know is info@thepixelproject.net. And you can find out more about Read for Pixels and all the authors who are currently supporting us and who have previously supported us, and what Read for Pixels is all about. You can find out more at is.gd Read for Pixels, and the 4 is the number 4. And we stop the slide. Cool. And you can find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it and how you can prevent it by visiting the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. And once again, if you want to find out more about the Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign, to which the funds are going to, and these will help both the Pixel Project and the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, you can visit reveal.thepixelproject.net to learn more about it and to see that those little bits of the first male role model that have already been revealed. Yeah, I think you can only see his sleeve at the moment. Sleeve and part of his shirt. It's right there on the homepage. Go check it out. And with that, I think Colleen and I thank you. Yep. And you guys have a great day and good night wherever you are in the world. And do check out the Indiegogo page. And tomorrow we're hosting young adult author, international best-selling young adult author Kimberly Durning, and it will be hosted by booktuber Grace Strong from Loving Them Books, which is a very popular booktuber channel on YouTube. So go check out Grace, go check out Kimberly, and we'll see you tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific time. Have a great Labor Day, everybody.